all one has to do really is look around and see the very fast-paced infrastructure development that's taking place in Ethiopia. We heard earlier about the very robust GDP growth in Ethiopia, which is about 6 to 7%, depending on which numbers you're looking at. And you certainly have one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. And you've been able to do this in spite of strong growth, in spite of numerous shocks. So, my question to you, Your Excellency, is what specific homegrown economic reforms have been responsible for this? What is it that you're doing that we need to pay attention to?
Thank you, our moderator, Excellencies, Ministers, Madam Nina Nwabufwe, FDB Vice President, Excellencies, other Vice President as well, AU Commissioners, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to join this distinguished panel to reflect on the report launched by African Development Bank on macroeconomic outlook of Africa. I just want to reflect first on the report. The report is informative, rich in analysis, and bold in its discussion of policy implications. It underscores the fragility of Africa's economic growth, which is projected to hover around 4% in the near term. So we need to keep an eye on our growth. This stands in sharp contrast to the 5% or more growth rate the continent registered in the last 2 decades before the recent multiple global shocks, including COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and internal conflict in some parts of Africa. The report also highlights persistent macroeconomic instability in many countries, with inflation averaging 19% and the fiscal deficit reaching a record 4.6% of GDP since the pandemic. Debt remains a pressing challenge, and the risk is growing. A lot of countries are facing debt distress. So I think a coherent and consistent policy and homegrown solution for our economic issues is very much important. Regarding the recent Ethiopia's macroeconomic management, since Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed came to power almost 7 years ago, Ethiopia is embarking on a comprehensive macroeconomic reform agenda, economic opening up, economic reform, where we are rebalancing the role of the state in the economy. We are moving towards private sector-led development, diversification of our source of growth, enabling the private sector, and public sector efficiency enhancement has been the major agenda of the whole government. Ethiopia, like many African nations, has endured global and domestic shocks. However, what sets us apart is bold steps we have taken to restore macroeconomic stability, build resilience, and accelerate growth. Particularly, Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed has been championing a comprehensive development agenda where diversification of source of growth, enabling the private sector, enhancing the efficiency of public sector overall, both budgetary performance, the quality of spending, as well as also the reform on public sector enterprises. Last year, we launched phase 2 of our homegrown economic reform, which is aligned with our 10-year development plan. This reform directly addresses macroeconomic challenges and charts a path for sustainable growth. Our efforts have received support from IMF and World Bank and other development partners, including the G20 Common Framework, to address our external debt burden. Ethiopia has embarked on most comprehensive macroeconomic reform in its the last 6 years. We are shifting from administratively determined to a market-driven exchange rate and a monetary policy. This is first of its kind in our history, which is a very bold initiative. We liberalized our exchange rate. We are opening up the banking sector. We are opening up most of the sectors to both foreign direct investment so that competition and external investment can be enhanced. We are also working on revenue mobilization. Fiscal policy is also very important. Domestic resource mobilization has been the major agenda of the government. In addition to that, we are also working on transformation of public enterprises. Ethiopia has one of the largest public enterprises in Africa, like Ethiopian Airline, which is very much efficient. We have a shipping line. We have a biggest telecom operator. We have also a biggest bank, commercial bank of Ethiopia, and other major government enterprises. Their efficiency has been enhanced, and through that, there has been significant economic dividend. As a result of this macroeconomic reform and diversification of source of growth and enabling private sector-led growth, we had a lot of successes. Particularly, inflation has dropped from around 24% to 15% this time. Foreign exchange reserve and FDI inflows have improved significantly. Our tax revenue has significantly increased, strengthening our fiscal position. We need to do more in terms of tax to GDP ratio, but in terms of absolute collection, there has been significant effort. We are also working on social protection programs, which has been expanded significantly as a result of the exchange rate liberalization and the new monetary policy. We are subsidizing fuel, fertilizer, medicine, essential goods, so that the poor can be protected from the reform. Real GDP has grown last year 8.1 percentage point. This year we are expecting more than 8.4 percentage point of real GDP growth, which is a very significant. You can see in Addis Ababa the massive expansion in terms of infrastructure of the city, development of the city, urban renewal, so that the city will be beautiful, clean, green, as well as livable, and the mobility is ensured, and also basic urban infrastructure is to the standard. This is not only in Addis Ababa, it is also in all parts of Ethiopia. And the diversification of source of growth, both in urban development as well as agricultural development in rural areas and mineral sector development, has been a major source of growth in the economy. So Ethiopia, with its size, now is the biggest economy in the region. With the current macroeconomic reform, we are expecting significant investment, expansion in the growth capacity in the economy. And as a result of that, we expect Ethiopia will continue to be the engine of regional economic integration, regional economic pillar, and stability. I would like also to really thank African Development Bank. I take this opportunity to commend our strong partnership with the African Development Bank, which has reached new heights under the leadership of President Azed Adesina, to whom we express our deepest gratitude and the leadership. While this may be his final term, we are sure of him that Ethiopia will continue to be his friend, and he's always welcome to work with us. He's going to be a global voice for African development, so he's always welcome to work with us. Currently, the African Development Bank has a commitment exceeding 1.2 billion in regional integration project, in agro-industrial parks, entrepreneurship initiative, job creation, and youth and inclusive growth, and also on wheat production. And Ethiopia is working with African Development Bank in regional integration project. Regarding global financial architecture, I think we need to do more by ourselves now. Global partnership is important. Reform of global financial architecture is very important. We need to attract to the maximum quality resources for African development, but we need to do more also domestically.
Allow me to come back to you again, Honorable Minister. But I think that, again, is an excellent overview of what Ethiopia is doing to bring it to its current situation, again, with a projected GDP growth of 8.4% in 2025. Extremely impressive. Macroeconomic stability and reforms, public sector reforms and efficiencies, enhancing the role of the private sector, liberalization of the exchange rate. If you followed Ethiopia's history over the last 20 years, you'll realize how critically important that is and how difficult it has been. Efficient public enterprise efficiencies, including Ethiopian Airlines, and thank God for Ethiopian Airlines. Many of us probably wouldn't be here today. And for those of you who don't know, Ethiopian Airlines is the oldest airline company on the continent and still growing strong.
One of the oldest globally as well.
Also globally, and one of the largest purchasers of Boeing jets globally, social protections, and the list goes on. So we say congratulations to you. In the wings and virtually is Mr. Sidi Keita, His Excellency, the Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs in the Gambia. Well, your colleague from Ethiopia has laid down the gauntlet. In 2023, you had a GDP growth of 5.3%. 2024, 5.7%. In spite of multiple shocks, Gambia still shows itself to be extremely resilient. And I know that you have ambitions to do a whole lot better than that in 2025. Again, our Honorable Minister has laid down the benchmark for us here today. What is it that you've done in the Gambia to overcome the shocks in terms of your policies? And what do you expect in the near future, growth-wise? Over to you.
Yes. Good morning, moderator, Honorable Minister, the staff and senior management of the African Development Bank, and all the other participants present. It is my pleasure to participate in this launching of the African Economic Outlook, and to share our experience of what we have been doing as a country. We have, as has been rightly mentioned, grown by 5.7% in 2024 on the backdrop, despite the challenges and shocks. And this was made possible through our own national policies, as well as working with our development partners, particularly the African Development Bank, the IMF, the World Bank, and other bilateral agencies that have been supporting us in our development agenda. But when the shocks took effect, we realized as a country that the only way is to look inward. Our development needs are challenging and huge. Meanwhile, the inflows of assistance is dwindling over time. So we have approached our solution to the challenge, to the shocks, on multiple prongs. The first of which is the focus on the domestic resource mobilization. We have emphasized that if you look at our share of revenue, tax revenue to GDP, we were hovering below the sub-Saharan African average and that of those numbers of the OECD. And how do we address this? We look at digital solution to the revenue mobilization. And on this note, I hasten to place on record our appreciation to the African Development Bank for helping finance the ASCUDA wall, which is the revenue collection of customs through a digital solution. With this ASCUDA wall, the Revenue Authority, that is the GRA, has been able to digitalize its revenue collection, bringing in more efficiency and compliance into the customs aspects of revenue collection. This has helped us increase our revenue dramatically. And as we speak, our revenue collection has increased by more than 100% over the last 5 years. And specifically in 2022, our domestic revenue collection was 11.67 billion. But in 2024, we closed on 20.8 billion, an increase of more than 76%. And we also look at the spending aspect of our national resources. We have introduced a new procurement law, that is the revised Gambia Public Procurement Act, to ensure public expenditures to be more transparent and value for money. This has enhanced the expenditure of the public resources and ensured that we had more value for money. So with that, we have seen efficiency in the public expenditure, and also it has given opportunity to a number of SMEs and other new participants to come into the procurement arena. The other reform we had embarked on was the public sector reform through the reforms of our state-owned enterprises. A new state-owned enterprise law was promulgated, and this focused on the financial performance and governance of these SOEs. As we know, over the history, these state-owned enterprises have been a drag on the public resources, in the sense that their performance had been below par, and it get to a point government had to bail out a number of state-owned enterprises. So an independent state-owned enterprise commission was put into force, and they are there to enhance the performance of the state-owned enterprises to the level that we expect pretty soon. And we've seen early signs of success that the state-owned enterprises are acting up and their financial performance is improving.
Honorable Minister, allow
yes.
me to quickly jump in and ask you a question here. You did say that on account of dwindling inflows, there's been enhanced domestic resource mobilization. I'm just curious, how have you been able to do this while ensuring that the burden for that does not impact the most vulnerable in your country? Of course, you've had tremendous success here, but how have you been able to do that?
Yeah, what we did is to broaden the tax base and to increase the efficiency. For your information, we have not increased the tax rates. Rather, what we did, we bring in more compliance network, data matching, to ensure that all potential participants in the economy that are entitled with tax come under the tax net. This has taken a number of very important results. As, for example, some of the large contractors that were exempted or were not within the tax radar have now come under the tax radar, and this has substantially increased. So we are very mindful of the vulnerable segments of society, and for the information of the audience, even our basic income tax rates, the minimum threshold has been increased from 24,000 per annum dollars to now 36,000, just to ensure that the tax compliance is not adversely affecting the vulnerable. But meanwhile, focusing on large taxpayers and other economic activities that were outside the tax net earlier. Those are the measures we have taken, cognizance of the fact that the enhanced revenue collection should not adversely affect the vulnerable segments of society.
And in addition to that, Honorable Minister, enhanced domestic resource mobilization is actually important, it's key, but in tandem also is very transparent and efficient delivery of services. How critical has that been for you in Gambia, given the expectations?
Well, in fact, what we have done with the results of the rise in domestic resource mobilization, our investment in the public infrastructure space has increased. Our electricity connectivity and coverage has increased. And today, as we speak, our coverage of the access to electricity is 63% as of now, and we expect this to rise to almost 90% by the end of the year, with the ultimate objective of universal access. The second element of that is investment in the road infrastructure. Connectivity and connection has been very difficult in the past, but we have now relied on domestic resources to expand the road network. And this has resulted in very positive outcomes, with some of the travel times being reduced by more than half than before the development of the infrastructure. I'm sure some of the participants in the room would have recently come to the Gambia during the OIC summit, and they would have seen the new Batin Hadin Highway, which has actually reduced the travel time between the airport and Banjul by more than half. So we are also cognizant to ensure that as we are collecting the revenue, we are giving results to the citizens or increased service delivery. We are participating in the provision of school feeding from a government budget to the vulnerable segments of the country, and also ensuring that the vulnerable segments of the society continue to benefit from direct cash transfers, not just from donors, but also from the central budget of the Gambia. So this is how we are translating into action the results of the efficiency gains in the revenue collection. And of course, we are providing 100% free education from kindergarten to grade 12, all funded through the public purse. And we occasionally, depending on the fuel price at the global market, if the prices hike through the plant prices are very high, we also subsidize the fuel prices to ensure that the external shocks of the rise in fuel prices are not directly passed on to the society. which cannot cope with it. So these are some of the measures that we have been adopting to ensure that the citizenry continue to see benefits of the efficiencies that have been registered in the domestic resource mobilization space.
And based on these reforms, what are your projections for 2025 in terms of GDP growth?
Well, our projections for 2025 are about 6%. We have seen some positive wins already, as our entire economic activities have seen substantial increase. The efficiencies in the road network, the electricity access has given rise to the development of body entrepreneurs in places that were never able to be. For example, today, if you go up provinces, you can see machinery, carpentry, and welding workshops that were not possible in the past. And this has even been translated into a revised urban-rural migration, with some people even relocating back to their communities due to the access to the electricity and the good road network.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Just hold on for us for a second. We'll still come back again to you next. I want to go on to His Excellency Ambassador Albert Muchanga, who has done an incredible job over the last few years working with the African Development Bank on multiple fronts. We're really indebted to you, Your Excellency. We thank you really for the role that you've played and continue to play on behalf of the bank and on behalf of Africa. You have one of the largest portfolios of all the commissioners at the African Union. As we've said during these proceedings, we're at a crossroad, really globally. Geoeconomic fragmentation, rising protectionist measures are reshaping global trade and investment. We've heard about an Africa First agenda. These are there's significant long-term implications for where we are at the moment. Are you worried or are you optimistic? What's the future that you see, and what do you feel Africa should be doing at this time?
The world is unpredictable, and the challenge is a fact of life. Every day, new issues come up. The question is, how does one respond to those issues? And also, sometimes you need to look towards the future and try to foresee the developments and to say, how do I ensure that if these issues emerge, I'll be able to maintain the position that I have and safeguard my interests. Now, when we look at these geopolitical issues, since 2021, I've been sending a message to Africans, even the policymakers, that the era of aid as we know it today is coming to an end. And the reality before us is that some countries are now more or less doing away with institutions that were designed to channel aid. And other countries, we had a meeting of the Development Committee of the World Bank and the Commissioner for International Partnerships at the EU more or less said what I said, that aid as we know it has come to an end. Therefore, the answer is, how do we position ourselves to ensure that we are able to emerge out of it? So the question of domestic resources mobilization has been at the forefront, and we have working with the member states to ensure that, as indicated, they increase tax collections, they broaden the tax base, they digitalize, and they also eliminate illicit financial flows going outside Africa. And some of the countries, as indicated here, are doing quite well, but others have not yet been able to do it. That is the first point. The second point is that the issue of economic integration comes into play, very much so. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a good start, but we need to go beyond it, because there is trade deflection in the free trade area. The best way to safeguard that is to come up with a common external tariff. So you need to move towards a customs union / common market. And we did come up with the readiness assessment towards an African customs union / common market. The ministers responsible for integration across Africa are looking at that document. So when we have that document, we're going to have a single trade policy for Africa, which is very, very, very good. And related to that is a question of macroeconomic convergence. When you look at the growth rates across Africa, they are not uniform.
Well, Ambassador Machanga, let me just jump in here, particularly with regards to the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Okay.
For a lot of observers who may not be fully integrated into the work of the African Union, we've been talking about Africa's integration for ages.
Yes.
But it's still not yet Uhuru.
Yes,
we're doing much more business with the rest of the world.
Yes.
We're sitting on an abundance of resources, but yet we just seem to be moving marginally. What can we do to accelerate the integration of our markets and trade, as well as adding value across borders? I think that's one of the critical issues of our time right now. Just help us understand.
Yes, first and foremost, we have created the African Continental Free Trade Area, a market space for trading.
Absolutely.
The challenge now comes to the business sector to respond. And in my statements, I've always said, since we established the African Continental Free Trade Area, I've never had a business person across Africa welcoming the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area to say, we are happy that you have established this market, and since it's a large market, we are going to invest so much in this market. And I always challenge the business people, come out of hiding, invest in the market, invest in manufacturing of both final goods and intermediate goods. So the response from the private sector has not been very, very, very encouraging.
But shouldn't the enabling environment and the policies drive that first? And the reason why I ask this is today we're a population of 1.2 billion. 2030, well, 2050, it'll be 2.4 billion. If we don't integrate the market now, the question is when?
Well, some time back there was a study by the African Export-Import Bank which said the stock of infrastructure that we have right now in Africa is capable of increasing intra-African trade. I've forgotten the figure, but relatively large figure. So we are underutilizing the current stock of infrastructure. We need to do more. Because what I would expect the business houses from Africa is to come up with the logistics centers across Africa, warehouses across Africa. I would also expect the shipping company, the private sector from Africa, the private sector from Africa, to start planning of coming up with any African shipping line. My dream is that one day we are going to have ships moving across Africa, both ways, delivering goods and taking them inland. Right now, what we have is a situation where we depend on ships owned by foreigners to ship goods from Africa to the next African country, and before they come to Africa, they have to go to Amsterdam and other places. So it comes back to the issue of the business. We are sitting on potential. The business sector has not really fully responded. Now, that also brings in another dimension. And before I answer directly, let me congratulate the Minister of Finance for Ethiopia to establish the stock exchange. But however, I would like to warn you that in quite a number of African countries, they established stock exchanges, and the initial number of companies that listed on those stock exchanges, as of today, this is still the same number. It has not increased. Now, why is that so? Because our enterprises, most of them, do not grow into big enterprises. They cannot afford to list on the stock markets. Now, when you do that, you come up with bigger enterprises, and they have the capacity now to undertake large-scale investments, such as coming up with the logistics centers, warehouses, and also the shipping centers, and even freight companies to move goods across the continent. So the challenge is the private sector. Now, when you look at the challenge of the private sector, if you Google right now, you Google Africa Wealth Report 2024. What you'll find there is that the aggregate investable wealth of the African billionaires, centimillionaires, and the ordinary millionaires is $2.5 trillion. They are not investing that money because they don't see any opportunities. Okay. So why is the problem?
So Ambassador, it does seem to me, therefore, that there's an opportunity for a convergence between the African Union, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the African Development Bank, other development partners, and the private sector, a major convening to move this forward. As you said, even in terms of logistics, moving a container of goods from Dubai or China to Africa costs much less than it does shipping the same volume of goods from Ghana to Nigeria and vice versa. So in terms of the value chains that need to be developed, the logistics, as well as the increasing role that AI is going to play, what can we do? You've talked about some of this, but rather than wait for the private sector, can we have a convening as quickly as possible with all the major stakeholders coming to the table to move us to the next level?
Well, the African Development Bank already has a platform, the African Investment Platform. Then the question is...
Which is business-based, but we're talking about the convergence of policies.
Okay, I'll come to that. Yes, they are doing very well. Now, within the margins of this ongoing Assembly of the African Union, I think either on the 15th or on the 16th, we are going to bring together the Pan-African financial institutions and African business people.
Fantastic.
And the question is, what do you want us to do for you to unlock your investments? Let's hope they'll respond. But as we ask that question, the business people always challenge them to say, on your own, ask yourself, what can I do to contribute to the progress of my continent? It's two ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not just a question of incentives. They should also try to look for opportunities and seize them. And when they see the opportunity, they say, we are going to take advantage of that. Absolutely. Now, back to the issue of growth of big businesses. The World Bank, I don't know which, one of the Economist Intelligence Unit, they came up with a report around December. Their assessment was that the problem with most of the African businesses is that there are so many small-scale enterprises.
True.
And most of them do not grow into big enterprises. So we needed to create conditions where they can grow. And it's a question of also the businesses also creating the conditions where they can grow. And I always give the example of a Chinese company, SANY, Sunny. 34 years ago, it was a small metal fabricator. And when it established its basic strategy was that we should invest 5% of gross revenue every year into innovation and research and development. And they were very disciplined. They did that. They used that money to go around the world to buy small enterprises as a source of transfer technology. Today, it's a multinational company operating in Africa and other parts of the world. That's the challenge that we give African entrepreneurs to say, come out and say, how can I contribute under the present conditions to the progress of my continent?
Thank you.
But before I leave, let me indicate that the issue of reform of the global financial architecture came into the picture. The African Union now is a permanent member of the G20.
Absolutely.
And we are very much seized with the situation. We are dealing with it in the G20. And to ensure that we come up with policy-based and policy-driven proposals in this issue and several others. We decided to create African Union-level knowledge partners, and the African Development Bank is one of our knowledge partners. So we'll be working together to ensure that we drive the process of reform of the global financial architecture from an African point of view. Thank you. Okay. And may I now be excused because I have to go and close the meeting somewhere.
Honorable Muchanga, just before you go, I just want to say a very big thank you for your points there. And you make a very, very valid point on the need for scaling up enterprises on the continent to bring together the best of talent, the best of technology, the best of money, whether that's through acquisitions, whether that's partnerships or the creation of conglomerates. That's really the future. And we want to say a very big thank you. Thank you for your time, and we wish you all the very best during the summit. Okay. Which now takes me to my dear sister, Nena Nwabufo. You've heard from the Honorable Ambassador Muchanga. You've also heard from our other panelists. Again, it's all about resilience in the midst of multiple shocks. Africa is resilient, and it will continue to be. What are those things that you see that countries can do to further build their resilience and better position them for development and growth?
Africa is resilient, but I think there are still quite a lot of opportunities that the countries can take. Our resilience in Africa has mostly been reactive and also at the primary level. You find that Africa still has a long way to go in terms of structural transformation and diversifying its economy. A lot of African countries still depend on one commodity. There were countries that depended on tourism. COVID came. Everywhere was shut down. It was chaos. There are countries that depend on mostly agricultural produce and without even any value addition. Even during COVID, you found that most of those countries couldn't export their products. Remember some countries were thriving with agricultural produce and small industrialization. They discover oil. Everybody abandons those and they run away. So we need to diversify the economy so that our countries can be dependent on more than one sector. So, and not only being dependent on more than one sector, we need to, Africa has the capacity in agriculture to feed itself and feed the world. But what we are lacking is value addition. The value chain is increased and they are imported back in Africa. We buy them. So there has to be some kind of diversification. Depending on more than one sector, we need to look at agricultural value chains. We need to look at manufacturing, even if it is small manufacturing. We need to look at services. And one area that Africa is growing is in the technology area. We have fintech areas that Africa is showing possibilities. So governments need to pay attention to these areas and grow them much more. And of course, you've heard the commissioner talk about movement of trade and goods, logistics centers. We have one of the fastest growing populations around the world. We have a huge population in Africa. Logistics is going to be key if we are going to grow our trade. So there are opportunities for countries to diversify their economy. But one low-hanging fruit that I see is that we need to build strong economic policy framework so that we can enhance our microeconomic stability, because that's one area where Africa is being shaken all the time. So we need some kind of coordination between our monetary and our fiscal policy, because it's important that we ensure that fiscal spending will align with what the central bank actions are. Sometimes you find that those two are not aligning. So, and therefore, we need to make sure that these align and they work hand in hand in order to avoid debt monetization when we are trying to bring down inflation and at the same time. The other thing is also governments need to adopt measures for capital flow management, because we need to tame disruptive outflows and foreign exchange interventions that could be part of the policy response. This could be part of the policy response that we need to substitute for necessary macroeconomic adjustments. We also heard about the conversation about the African Financial Stability Mechanism that the bank has been talking about and driving to say When European countries run into problems, they have the EU system, financial system. Well, when Africa runs into a problem, we don't have a financial system to bring about the stability that we need. We've also talked about the African Continental Free Trade Area, which everybody says is a game changer. But it can only be a game changer if it's implemented. If governments drive the policies, if governments make sure that the policies that they sign to are implemented. We talked about the private sector, what they can bring to the African Continental Free Trade Area, but has the government put in place the environment through which the private sector can come?
So for somebody who's a lead player on the African landscape in terms of infrastructure, I think the African Development Bank is the largest investor of infrastructure on the continent. What is it that the bank is doing to further enhance integration, to make sure that the vision, the dreams of the African Continental Free Trade Area becomes a reality? It's one thing for us to, again, look to countries and maybe the African Union. What is it, for those who may not be familiar with what the bank is doing, is happening out there in Côte d'Ivoire and in the different regions?
Now, of course, we know that enhancing regional integration in the continent requires tackling the huge infrastructure gap we have in Africa. And the bank, over the years, has invested at least 50 billion in this sector, whether it's road connectivity, whether it's supporting seaports, whether it is in railway. And some of the examples, one, at least until recently, I was in East Africa. The bank has built roads to connect Kenya to Ethiopia, Djibouti, Kenya to Sudan, Tanzania. We currently, as we know, Tanzania is involved in a massive railway, building railways. We have invested about 700 million to support connectivity between Tanzania and Burundi in terms of railway, and we leverage that 700 million as a lead arranger to raise we are raising about 3.2 billion to support that infrastructure. We have also built bridges that are connecting Senegal and Gambia is a very good example. We have the Kasungula Bridge that is connecting Botswana and Zambia. We have the Nakala Corridor that is linking Zambia, Malawi, and Mozambique. And so we have a very big track record in this area. Even the African Continental Free Trade Area, working with the African Union when it was being established, the bank invested $5 million to support the establishment of the African Continental Trade Area. This was in 2020.
That's the headquarters in Ghana.
In Ghana.
Yeah.
And in 2022, we provided an additional amount of equivalent of about 11 million to strengthen the functioning of the Secretariat, to make sure that it can work with other development partners to make sure that they realize the full potential.
And in less than 1 minute, how optimistic are you that we can accelerate Africa's integration a whole lot further than we have right now, given the urgency of now? How optimistic are you?
I'm very optimistic. I'm very, because one, besides what we've done so far, the bank is supporting in building payment systems. We've already succeeded in building payment systems across all the countries in East Africa. We are also supporting in terms of building internet connectivity. We are also supporting in terms of making sure that digital infrastructure is available to support. But I think, and as you know, on Tuesday, we launched the 9th edition of the African Visa Openness Index, because we are trying to encourage African countries to open up to other Africans to come and invest.
Okay.
Integration is not going to be done when people cannot cross our borders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to come to, before the Honorable Minister leaves, I'm going to come to Dr. Mutai Maruping, the chairperson of the Africa Risk Capacity Group Board. We've heard a lot about the issues of perception, risk perceptions on the African continent, and the impact that that has on investments. What is it that you think can be done to mitigate this? How much of a factor is it? And will the development of an indigenous African credit rating agency be the solution and how realistic is that from your perspective?
No,
I know it's a lot of questions in one.
Yes, and you have every right to do so. So many questions before us on the continent. Thank you very much for having me.
And if you could kindly raise your microphone just a little
Yeah,
bit more.
and I want to really allow me to congratulate the team that put together the document, very comprehensive, given the circumstances. So, Professor Oruma and your team, we congratulate you. From the word go, I want to point out that you know, it's a mathematical fluke when we see the growth rates or real growth rate. We must be careful that it's dependent also on the base. The least developed the country is when it makes some strides, the percentage is very high, very impressive. Unlike as the country grows, a given percentage is a given percentage of a magnitude, you know, a large amount. So we have to be careful. So least developed countries really have to be in the double digit, preferably. And then those that are higher already, then we can be talking about 7, 8, and so on. Okay, right. 2, aggregates hide a lot. And, I'm sure, although we must aggregate sometimes, but the variance can be very, very, very wide. Among countries and within countries, distribution, so they can hide quite a lot. So as we read the report, we have to have this at the back of our minds. So I see that what I'm being called upon to address very briefly really is the question of whether the African economies are being accurately evaluated, and then also what can we do to enhance credit worthiness. If I repeat some of the things, but they are relevant to enhancing or to doing that, it's like a song, you know, a refrain. When you go to chorus to make a point, the message is in the chorus. So some of the things Professor Oruma had mentioned. One of the first things to go for that accuracy in evaluation is accurate, you know, is to strengthen the statistics function in our countries. We have to ensure that we have comprehensive data, that it, you know, we're talking about scope here or adequacy. We have to have accurate data. We have to have punctual data. It has to be punctual, not stale, because that will be passé, that will be something that is far off, so that you can adopt a proper remedial action. So accuracy, timeliness, adequacy in scope are very important. So that way we will get a very clear still picture as well as the motion picture. Then we know policy measures, how deep do we go? You know, it's like a doctor assessing you, and then the dosage, you know, what kind of medication, the dosage, how frequent, and so on. You need that data to do the same with the economy. So we have this sketchy data so far. Once upon a time, I was governor of the central bank, and I remember whenever the IMF and the World Bank came for Article 4 consultations, they would be going around and working with guesstimates, interpolations and extrapolations, maybe some even guesses, I guess. If they were friendly to you, they would give you a good report. If they had issues with you, they would give a negative one. So really, our countries have to join the ongoing data revolution. Now about enhancing credit thing. So our bottom line is that I don't see perceptions, I see misperceptions of the African risk. That's what is going on now. But let's make sure that Africa brings to fruition the African Union's call for or commitment to silencing the gangs across the continent, really. It may be hard, but let's pursue it, really, very hard, because that is very important in enhancing creditworthiness. And let's go to the old staple. It may be an old song, but it is as valid as it was when it was composed, this song. And that is good governance, functional governance institutions are very efficient, they have to be functioning and working well. Rule of law, transparency, and accountability. They must be seen to be practiced. Okay. We have to combat illicit financial outflows. ECA, in conjunction with the African Union Commission, had a beautiful study under the leadership of President Mbeki. And they were supposed to work on the modalities, but I had left the African Union Commission at that time to how to actually stop that. Then there is this question of infrastructure, both hard and soft, but I think that has been adequately addressed, and we are grateful to the African Development Bank with its high fives because the infrastructure features there, but also the flagship projects within Agenda 2063. Then I want to underline that meticulous macroeconomic management is very important, but it must have a human face. We shouldn't just be chasing figures there without a human face. And that's what had been lacking originally when these structural adjustment programs were started, human face. And then we have to maintain really deepening our financial sectors as much as possible and financial inclusion. And realizing that aspiration which has been discussed of economic integration. And this is the challenge to our RECs that we have to move. We were talking about free trade area. It's a journey. It's just the beginning of the journey. We are yet to move to the customs union, to the common market, and then to the economic community, because then the creditors would be looking at a larger, integrated economies than disjointed thing. Okay, and then the international, last point, the skewed international financial architecture is very skewed, and it has to be dealt with. Now, credit rating, well, they have to reform themselves because they are using archaic methods. They are using superficial information. They don't engage with the institutions in the countries that are concerned. And they are often swayed by the narrative of the international media, which of course takes pleasure in bashing Africa. You can't make it as a good journalist in international media houses unless you are a good Africa basher. So you have to,
I think, Dr. Merrill,
you're
opening up a huge can of worms there.
I know I'm being provocative,
but unfortunately, there's much validity to what you said. I remember a number of years ago, I was looking at the BBC, the BBC's front page on its website, and there were about 7 stories on Africa, and there was not a single one of them that was positive. I'm of the opinion that some of that many times is deliberate, and if it's not deliberate, then it's the result of intellectual laziness, which means that somewhere down the road, we as Africans need to own our own narrative and also shape it. Dr. Marapeng, allow me to quickly come to Mr. Amayehu Tafese, for a very quick intervention here, and I'm going to allow you just 1 to 2 minutes to provide closing comments, and we'll bring this very fast-paced event to a close. So, Mr. Tafese, we've heard quite a bit about some of the challenges that we're facing, the shocks that we're facing, and one of those has been in the ag and food space. Spiraling food prices, which again have led to inflation. If there are 3 things that African countries can and must do on a continent with an abundance of land, an abundance of labor, water resources, and interconnected markets, what are those 3 critical things that we should be doing to move the agenda forward? And I ask this question very deliberately because for many Africans, the greatest proportion of their spending and their income goes to food, not accommodation, to food. And in many countries at the moment, it's even impossible to have 3, let's not even talk about 3 square meals a day. I think even just having one round meal a day is a challenge. In the paradox of plenty, what is it that we can and must do to change the picture?
Thank you.
Comments from you, and then we'll take closing comments and bring our event to a close this afternoon.
Okay, thank you very much.
And if you could speak directly into your microphone, maybe raise it a little higher. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. So this is a very critical question. There are 2 ways of looking at it. The first is mitigation. The other is creating resilience. In terms of mitigation, I would be brief. It is necessary to have at least 3 major interventions, policy interventions at the country and regional level. The first of those is an effective early warning system that tracks food crisis situations and enable policymakers and others to identify where these crisis areas are, what are their sources, and how to address them. The second related intervention would be having an anticipatory action framework. A lot of assistance for emergencies come after the crisis has occurred, not before, and by then the damage may have been already done. Obviously, lives are saved as a result, but the longer consequences in terms of productivity may have taken place already. So it is useful to have these anticipatory action plans which identify responsibilities, allocate resources, and also shift the focus from immediate reaction to a more long-term solution. The third item in terms of mitigation I would like to highlight are social protection systems. These are obviously programs which provide assistance to the vulnerable, and they serve in non-crisis times to support and boost the welfare and capabilities of those vulnerable ones. But at times of crisis, they provide protection. And these obviously would be an important element that many countries can adopt. Many did, but again, access, particularly by the poor, is still limited. So it is important to get there. Now, at the core of all this challenge of shocks is our circumstances. First, agriculture is still with low productivity, and it is operating in changing circumstances with population growth, fragile environment, climate change, fragile institutions, including conflict, and also, but the potentials that you outlined, land, water, young population, and so on. This is a multidimensional problem, and more recent understanding of that has shifted the orientation to have a food system transformation perspective, where this systemic approach is adopted. But because you asked me to identify 3 things, I would mention very quickly what they need to be. One is agricultural productivity has to increase significantly, and this requires investment in productivity-enhancing technologies, including improved seeds and climate-smart technologies, irrigation, animal breeds, and so on. Second, agricultural commercialization has to be accelerated significantly, because that opens up the positive feedback loop between markets and productivity or production to the future. And the third, which has been talked about already here, and that is expand inter-Africa trade in agricultural commodities, such that we have a more reliable food supply. Let me stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tafese. I'm going to allow our panelists to provide closing comments here, very short, 1 to 2 minutes. Give us your take, not just for what we've heard, but what you believe that we need to do moving forward. I'm going to start with the Honorable Minister from Gambia, His Excellency Mr. Sidi Keita, who is online, I trust is still online, to provide the first closing comments, and we'll start with our panelists and end with our Honorable Minister from Ethiopia. Again, kindly bear with us, Honorable Minister. I know you have to run. Well, let's do that. Honorable Minister from Gambia, Minister Keita, your closing comments.
Thank you very much. I thank all my colleague panelists for this launching session. I think the closing comment I would say is increasingly more and more as Africans willing to look inward. We need to build our institutions. We need to use digitalization and maximize revenue collection domestically, whilst taking account of the vulnerable segment of society, and ensure that the low and middle income earners are not adversely impacted by the enhanced domestic resource mobilization drive. Another area is to ensure that we trade more as a continent. If you look at the interregional trade, it's so low. If you look across African borders, it takes such a long time for goods to move from one country in Africa to another. And all these inefficiencies are added onto the cost of goods in the continent. This is artificially increasing the cost of living, and these barriers are not adding any value to the process. If you compare other European countries and other parts of the world, movements of goods and people within those regions are very fluid. So for Africa to grow, that must also be looked at.
Thank you.
The third element I would focus on is investment in infrastructure. Infrastructure is the artery to any economic development. So we must invest in the road and digital network, as well as electricity, to ensure that our citizens can be able to move from place to place with the least hindrance and within the shortest possible time, have access to affordable and reliable electricity, as well as having access to the digital world through technology.
Thank you very much,
All these reforms, digital domestic resource mobilization, cannot be done by only policy changes, but digital solution is the way forward. And to do so, you need a strong digital backbone, affordable and reliable internet connectivity, so that services can thrive.
Honorable
I think
Minister,
these are my interventions, and I appreciate the effort of the recommendations in the report. I hope as Africans, we should do less talk now and work more on delivery.
I would say a very big amen to that. Honorable Minister, thank you very much for those closing comments, and you're doing a fantastic job in the Gambia with the reforms that you're implementing, as well as the government of the Gambia. I'm going to go to Mr. Tafese for your closing comments. Again, 60 seconds to 120 seconds, 1 to 2 minutes each.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I think.
And if you could speak directly into your microphone, sir.
I think there are a lot of ideas, plans, aspirations, and policy interventions that we have heard today and we have been hearing all along, and successes also. So I think the key in the future, the key direction should be implementation capacity. From the design stage, it is important to think about implementation and also invest in implementation capacity such that policies and interventions are implemented, monitored, and become successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tafese. And we're going to come to Dr. Maroping for your closing comments.
Yes, 4 points. One, African countries should stay the course in implementing Agenda 2063. You know, the next 10 implementation plan was adopted last year by the summit. Two, African Development Bank should stay the course with the high fives. They are very pregnant and they really enrich Agenda 2063. Three, an indigenous rating agency would be a good idea, basing itself on objective and basing itself on quality data, which we hope can come by. Four, credit rating would go up knowing, or raters knowing that as we do all these developmental efforts, in the background, I think as you were saying, there is capacity for early warning systems and capacity to deal with climate change caused disasters. And that's where Africa risk capacity comes in.
Thank you.
So it should be supported. Thank you very much.
Dr. Maroping. Mrs. Nena Nwabufo, your closing comments.
Thank you. Two things quickly. I think when Professor Rama spoke, he spoke about debt productivity. Because debt is not so bad, but it's what you do with debt. So I think countries should begin to focus on what productivity can they drive with the debt they contract, especially the external debt. The second thing I would like to talk about is this credit rating agency for Africa. The question is, if you have an African credit rating agency, are people going to, can you use that to leverage your borrowing in the international market? It may not be so. But up till now, the African countries, organizations, we do not have a basis to challenge and to question the international credit rating agencies. So if we have one that is growing in Africa, we can use that as a basis to challenge whatever is coming. And once we begin to challenge, I think the topic on redefining the financial architecture will change, because it will give us the basis to say, we have been cheated so far. We have the basis to prove you wrong. We want a new financial architecture that will give Africa a more favorable platform. Thank you.
Very excellent point there. And in addition to what the chief economist, Professor Rama, said earlier, factoring the value of Africa's natural and green wealth. We're going to leave the last closing comment, but certainly not the least, to our host minister today. Mr. Shide, please, your own closing comments.
Africa's development is a global public good, and the partnership is very important. But most importantly is the national ownership. Countries should own its development paths, and the commitment has to be internally driven, but also most importantly globally supported, because Africa's comprehensive development is a global public good. Ethiopia, for the last 7 years, under the leadership of Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed, has demonstrated sustained strong growth, diversified growth, and the private sector-led growth, while addressing the macroeconomic imbalance, which also paving the way to attract FDI by improving the ease of doing business. So I would like to say four issues are very important. Leadership is very important. The last 6 years demonstrates significant economic policy reform, macroeconomic reform, and development-oriented government intervention. This is a result of quality of intention and quality of attention by the whole leadership, championed and of course led by the Prime Minister. So leadership is very important. Second, the whole government approach. Ethiopia's macroeconomic reform, we have come from state-led growth to more of towards private sector-led growth, and a lot of economic reform and opening up and liberalization required bold leadership and whole government approach. And most of the agendas of economic reform is well-crafted, internally debated, consensus is reached. So the whole government approach is another very important issue. The third is massive public participation. For example, the Green Legacy Initiative, championed by the Prime Minister, for the last 6 years, we are able to plant seedlings up to 40 billion. Tens of millions of Ethiopians every year during rainy season voluntarily participating on seedlings. And this is significantly boosting our afforestation program. So as a result of this approach, in addition to that, the role of the private sector, some of the initiative of the government to diversify the economy, for example, in terms of greening urban cities, making cities livable, tourism destination development, is not only financed by traditional resource mobilization. A lot of voluntary contribution by the private sector has enabled those investments. So the role of the private sector is very important. As a result of this holistic approach, Ethiopia has sustained huge investment on infrastructure. Most of our debt is quality debt. I say quality because we have created railway, we have created expressway, we have created hydroelectric dams, we have built a lot of transmission lines, we have created sugar industries. All of the debt Ethiopia owed to international creditors, we created quality assets, generating significant return for the economy. Not necessarily cash, but economic return for the whole economy. That is also driving Ethiopia's growth agenda. Agricultural development, industrial capacity building, export promotion, all this is significantly contributing to our growth. And digitalization, particularly under the Prime Minister's championship, we have expanded financial inclusion, digital financial services, and digital government services. And this is significantly enhancing productivity also. Green development is another area. Most of the infrastructure development in Ethiopia has also regional dimensions. Railway, we built it together with Djibouti. The express roads, it is toward Djibouti or Somalia or Kenya. The energy, we are the largest exporter in the region, to exporting to Kenya, to Sudan, to also Djibouti. We are now building the second line to Djibouti. So Ethiopia and its development trajectory is not only benefiting Ethiopians, but also benefiting the entire region. That's why regional integration, regional solidarity is very important. So local ownership, local commitment with global support is a way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on that note, that's an excellent note to bring this very robust session to a close. Just really 8 quick points here. Less talk, more action. Implementation, capacity investment, stay the course on Agenda 2063 and the high fives, an indigenous ratings agency based on credible data, external debt productivity and quality debt, national ownership of the development agenda, leadership and a whole government approach rather than silos, green legacy initiatives, agricultural transformation, as well as the deepening of a digital economy. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, really, this has been a very fascinating tour de force of the 2025 macroeconomic report. I just want to end by saying Africa's future is not predetermined by global shocks or uncertainties, but rather by the bold choices we, the people, make. Let us leave this room today with a shared commitment to translate data into decisive policies, challenges into opportunities, and potential into prosperity. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely thank you on behalf of the organizers of this event for your patience. We've run out of time, unfortunately, and I know our Honorable Minister and some of the other panelists have to run on to some other sessions. This has been an excellent time. Thank you to the Chief Economist and to his team. We look forward to the report that you're going to release tomorrow. This has been my pleasure moderating and emceeing this event. My name is Victor Ladokun. I wish you a great afternoon, bon appetit, and have an excellent stay here in Addis Ababa. God bless you.